there are going to be more than 2,000 different robots there. There are nearly 700 robot teams. They're going to be competing in these events. There are participants from 16 different countries. So we really can look at this as a window of sorts into China's strategy when it comes to robotics. They are all in on this.
Hey everybody, and welcome to Here's the Scoop from NBC News. I'm Brian Chung, filling in for Yasmin Vasugian. Today on the show, we're getting a preview of what to expect at the World Humanoid Robot Games, taking place this Saturday in Beijing. Plus, John Allen wraps up his Drive to Decision Day road trip at the political mecca that is the Iowa State Fair, with a surprise sighting from someone who says he's definitely not running for president. But first, midnight tonight marks the latest deadline for the US and Canada to finalize a trade deal before a massive 50% tariff would go into effect. That would impact $20 billion worth of US imports from Canada, according to the US Trade Representative's office. Now, those tariffs were set to start Wednesday, but President Trump issued a pause, saying that the US and Canada were making a deal, although no specifics were provided. And American and Canadian negotiators are still at the negotiating table hammering out the details. One major sticking point, the auto industry. So could this deal impact an industry that's already been struggling with the higher costs of tariffs? I'm joined now by Nora Eckert, autos correspondent for Reuters. Hey, Nora.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Okay, so the US and Canada, they're working out this potential deal framework, including haggling over auto tariffs. Where do we stand on this Friday with regards to those negotiations?
Yeah, well, things can change any minute, but it does seem like we are going to be racing towards a midnight deadline tonight to reach a deal. For now, I think the automakers and the countries are hoping that this will be resolved tonight because this has been a year of limbo for them and added costs as they face higher levies than some of their rivals.
If we rewind all the way to the beginning of this second term of this Trump administration, what happened that got us to where we are right now? Because there's been a lot of tariffs, a lot of back and forth, a lot of tariffs that never came to pass, some that did. Like, can you give us a quick recap of the last year of tariff ups and downs, if you will, in the auto industry?
Yeah, it's tough to keep track of the status of these various tariffs because really for the last year, even more than a year, it's been so in flux. So of course, we've had the US, Mexico, Canada tariffs, which have been at about 25% for a while now. There are some deductions for US content built into those. But then you've got the various tariffs that these automakers have had to face on Japan, Europe, Korean imports, and that's obviously affected US automakers very differently from Asian automakers or European automakers. But right now, a lot of those trade deals have been worked out. I mean, we'll put China as sort of a big variable in the corner as well. There's a lot of uncertainty there, and they're facing higher levies. But this is really the last element for US automakers that they need to have certainty on. And as of now, they are facing worse levies than some of their competitors.
These negotiations are coming after the US threatened this 50% tariff because they didn't like the way that Canada was treating American imports, not just for the automotive industry, but also for dairy products, alcohol products. But the automotive industry is a really big deal because the US and Canada are so deeply intertwined in that industry, right?
Right. And actually a 15% tariff would be a relief from what we have right now, which is the 25%, and would put US automakers more in line with what we're seeing from Korea and Japan. But there's been some sort of struggles over whether that baseline tariff should be at 15% or if it should be lower. And then there's a lot of discussion about what do you subtract from that? There's just a lot of variables for these automakers.
And can you describe the US-Canadian relationship specifically? Because I think people might not necessarily wrap their heads around just how close Ontario is to Michigan and how there's a bridge and multiple bridges now that connect the two. I remember visiting an auto parts company in Michigan that says that they bring parts back and forth from Canada multiple times per day. It is so closely intertwined.
Yeah, from where I live, I can see across the border very clearly. And talking especially to the Canadian auto unions over the last year or so, this has been a very touchy issue for them. Automakers like GM, Ford, and Stellantis employ thousands of workers in Canada. And in fact, the Canadian Auto Union is in the middle of negotiations with those automakers right now. And there's this sense that, hey, we don't stand on as firm a footing as we used to. There's plants that are shuttered. There's thousands of workers on layoff. So it's a very tense relationship right now.
There are negotiations happening right now between the US and Canada, but there's a broader question over what's going to happen with the USMCA, that trade agreement between Mexico, Canada, and the US, which was essentially allowed to expire earlier this year.
Right. For a long time, we were wondering if there was going to be a bilateral agreement with each country or a trilateral agreement. I think that all three parties are still pushing to have some sort of joint resolution, but there's this sense in Detroit, I think, that we're not going back to the way things were, which might seem incredibly obvious to everyone who's been following this industry. But I remember just starting following when the levies were enacted in the last year, there's this sense that, oh, we'll get back to duty-free trade. We have to. This is, how our industry is built. But something to pay attention to, depending on how this deal, is developed and what terms these entities agree to, is if there are really strict U.S. content provisions, for example, or if the deductions are only on U.S. content, you might see some automakers choosing to continue to import vehicles because it's still more expensive for them to comply with USMCA or the renegotiated USMCA versus just importing from Korea, for example. So obviously that is not what President Trump wants. And so we'll be eyeing to see how many automakers make these moves when we know what the final terms are.
I want to ask about the complicated nature of all of this because, as you mentioned, in some cases, it's about the percentage of the part or the percentage of the car that's made in a certain country that determines whether or not it's tariffed. I mean, do auto manufacturers and auto parts, small businesses, they have to have 4 lawyers looking over the trade law and actually at the plant, measuring out what percentage of the alloy comes from what country to figure out how to comply? It seems crazy.
This is something I have been fascinated with, over the last few months, especially, is just the immense compliance burden on these companies. And let's not forget, they're also facing a bunch of other regulations that they already have to comply with. And there's the connected vehicle rule banning Chinese tech from certain models. I mean, all the small suppliers up to the massive automakers are facing this. But you have to remember that the smaller companies don't have, four lawyers on hand that can help them, sift through what is compliant and what isn't. And in certain cases, for certain regulations, the fines for not complying are really, really strict. And there's so much confusion around how to even define what is U.S. content. I mean, I remember early on in our reporting, we were asking, do you need to go into the thread on the seatbelt? If there's a different supplier of this thread that happens to be, from Mexico or from China, does that count? And I've just been hearing that from sources again this week, is we still have so much confusion over how to even define these things. It's going to be really tough to get to a deal that we can easily understand as an industry.
And obviously the big question is, how does this impact American consumers, people who might not know the nuances of trade law or understand how cars are built? They just want to know what they pay for a car that they try to drive off the lot. So what is the total impact of all of this on people trying to buy a car?
Automakers have been warning for the last year that tariffs are adding billions and billions in cost to them every year. And they've again warned us with USMCA. We had some reporting last week citing some calculations that there was at least $2 billion in added costs per automaker, depending on how the USMCA deal is finished. So this is obviously a huge burden on the automakers, but they need to decide how much they're going to pass on to suppliers or to consumers. And, the president doesn't want car prices going up. In fact, he has said from the start that part of the reason he wants to build locally is to, prevent that, is to lower prices. But for the near term, that's not how our industry is built. So we have been closely tracking how tariffs have added to vehicle prices. And we have seen, some movement, but I think overall there hasn't been a big increase, as big of increase as maybe some analysts have warned. So we'll have to see if the USMCA deal is the straw that broke the camel's back on that. But I would be hesitant to say it's going to be a massive price shift depending on where we are, because the automakers they always seem to find a way.
Nora Eckert at Reuters, thank you so much.
Thank you.
All week, we've been riding along with NBC News senior national political reporter John Allen on his drive down Interstate 80 from New Jersey to Nebraska, hearing how voters are thinking and feeling ahead of the midterms. After a busted tire, a stop at the barber, and a lot of miles, it is just almost time to return the rental. But before he does, We're going to catch up with John for a final dispatch about his visit to the one, the only Iowa State Fair. Hey, John, how are you?
I'm good. How are you, man?
Okay, the Iowa State Fair. This is the mecca for politics. I mean, anyone who runs or even thinking about running ends up making a stop there. Why is that? How did the Iowa State Fair become such a focal point for office?
So the reason that it's such a focal point for office is it's a huge gathering of people from all across the state, and it's held in Des Moines in Polk County, which is the most populous in Iowa. It's not exactly centrally located in the state, but fairly centrally located in the state. Like it's a little south, a little east, but like a lot of state capitals, like a place that people can come to from all over. At this point, they're turning, more than 100,000 people a day through the gates. So it's a real opportunity for politicians to meet voters all in one place. And guess what? It's also a place for reporters to meet lots of voters all in one place.
And so tell us about the spectacle of the Iowa State Fair. I think anyone that's been to a state fair is familiar with maybe the butter statues, the fried Oreos. Like, what were the sights and smells of the Iowa State Fair? Did you have anything that was like, whoa, that was crazy? I definitely don't need to eat that ever again.
No, I only had really awesome things. I had I had 2 bacon-wrapped pork ribs. I also had a pork burger that I believe was flipped by either Attorney General Todd Blanche or someone in his party. And by the way, I should mention that the Iowa State Fair is great for pork, beef. You want meats, you get some great meats.
Now, we have to rewind because you kind of glaze over it pretty quickly. Todd Blanche served you at the Iowa State Fair?
Yeah, I mean, more or less served me. So Todd Blanche came to the Iowa State Fair at the request of the senior senator from Iowa and really the senior senator from anywhere, Chuck Grassley. And Grassley, who's like a nonagenarian, is very influential with Senate Republicans, and particularly on the Judiciary Committee. And Blanche was, I think, showing gratitude for Grassley having gotten him through the confirmation process just a few days ago. This is not something that was broadcast ahead of time. There was not like, we didn't know he was going to be there until we were there, until shortly before he arrived. And then they have this, sort of huge cooker, like a huge grill that's part of a Pork Producers Association exhibit. And so he stands back there with this like huge long spatula and flips pork burgers, which is something that candidates do. So I asked him, exclusive to NBC News, I asked him if he was running for president.
How's it going? Hey, how are you? What's up? How are you?
Good. You running for president?
I'm not, no.
Are you sure?
No, I'm sure.
Never? Because usually people come here, they flip.
For sure.
He said a couple of other things. He kind of commented on Eric Swalwell, the former congressman. There was an FBI raid of his house. There was a raid today on Eric Swalwell's house. Did you personally sign off on that?
Well, as you know, I'm not allowed to talk about any sort of ongoing investigation. It's certainly not what role I played in it. So, yeah, I can't comment on that. So.
And then remember that he's also supposed to say he can't comment on whether there's an investigation or whether there's a raid. Even on who signed off on the raid? I mean, typically...
I can't even comment on whether there was a raid, much less on who signed off. Thank you. But just to reemphasize again, I am not running for president.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
So you said it's a great place to talk to people from all over Iowa being at the state fair. NBC News just spoke to undecided voters who said they were kind of concerned about some aspects of this, state we find the country in, particularly the economy.
Yeah, absolutely. Everywhere we go, and Iowa's no exception, but I think Iowa gets hit hard because of its sort of mix of industries and the ways in which the federal government interacts with it. People are really unhappy with continued inflation and diesel prices and gas prices, which hammers farmers in addition to the tariffs that they're dealing with. Basically either the tariffs themselves or reciprocal tariffs. it ends up hitting them both on the export and the import front. And the president has done some things to try to help subsidize the farmers, but most of them say that they want less government subsidy, not more. That they like the idea of being independent, and what that does is it makes them feel like they're less independent.
And I want to just take a moment to reflect on your whole trip. I mean, it's been 6 days, 1,700 miles. What have you taken away from this trip? What did you learn about this part of America? What stands out to you?
Number one, a lot of people really aren't focused on politics as much as some of the rest of us are. But also, they do focus on politics when it affects them, and particularly when it affects them negatively. And the high prices are a problem. There's frustration at both parties. I think, over the course of the last 25 years or so, Americans have seen wars in Afghanistan, Iraq, Iran, Libya, Syria. They have seen a financial crisis that really hammered homeowners and investors. They've seen inflation that's been way out of control. Started in the last presidential administration and moved into this one, and that's where they contact with politics. One of the issues that I think is going to be really big in this election is data centers. Basically, a lot of governments are looking at data centers as an opportunity to bring in revenue without raising taxes. At the same time, there are a lot of voters, whether their concerns are about, environmental conservation, or their concerns are about utility spikes, rising rates of electricity and water usage, or simply, and we heard this a lot in Iowa, data centers using the prime farmland, going and buying flat land, which is the easiest to farm, or the best for farming usually, is also the best for building a massive hyperscale data center, because you don't want to have to level all the ground. So it's a reminder that everybody's dealing with lots of stuff, but when they feel pain from politics, they will focus on the politicians, and particularly incumbents. I think there continues to be an anti-incumbent mood in this country, period.
NBC News senior national political reporter John Allen on the road, wrapping up. Get some rest, John. We'll talk to you soon.
Thanks, Brian.
If you are afraid that robots are going to take over the world, don't freak out, because we're not quite there yet. If you need evidence of that, all you need to do is check out the World Humanoid Robot Games taking place this Saturday in Beijing. At the first edition of that competition last year, robots were facing off in sports including soccer, track, boxing, and they were malfunctioning left and right. But there are signs that robotics have made big strides in the meantime. In fact, this April, a robot named Lightning ran a half marathon in 50 minutes and 26 seconds. That beat the world record set by a human. So will the robots set new records at this weekend's games, or do they still need a few extra screws and upgrades? For more on this, I'm joined now from Beijing by NBC News correspondent Janis Mackey Frayer. Hey, Janis.
Hey, Brian. Great to be here.
So, Janis, this is just the second year of the World Humanoid Robot Games. Can you explain that title and why this competition was started?
Well, it's more than a robot Olympics, though there is a lot of spectacle. There's running events, kung fu, boxing. This year they're adding things like weightlifting and tug of war. But the robots are also importantly being tested on practical skills, things like sorting your laundry or firefighting or working in a hotel, taking bags. What Beijing is doing with this is really using this very public performative event as a means to be a testing ground, as well as trying to nurture an audience, because ultimately these are the people they want to one day invite robots into their homes. In terms of the numbers, they're developing the technology. They want to develop the audience for it, and then ultimately they need to commercialize it. And this will be the foundation of what they see as the next industrial revolution.
And so to be clear, this is not just Chinese robots competing in Chinese games. There are teams from all over the world that are competing in this. What does that kind of tell you about the competitive landscape internationally in the robotics race?
Well, there's no doubt that China dominates this space. They have hundreds of robot companies. Not all of them will survive, but at this point, there's so much state backing for this because China has made robotics a national priority. So what that means is that there are tax breaks, there are incentives, there is real estate and tech parks to try to develop the industry. The U.S. lacks, for all intents and purposes, a national government-backed strategy when it comes to robotics, the way that Japan had and the way that China now has. They've invested last year $570 billion. There are 295,000 humanoids, industrial robots rather, that have been installed in factories, compared to, I think it's 34,000 in the United States. And they dominate the global market for humanoid shipments. IDC saying that China accounts for 82% of the humanoids that are being shipped. So the numbers are there, and the investment, state and private, in Chinese firms has been substantial. It doesn't mean that the U.S. is out of the race. Far from it. The U.S. is seen as leading in the brains of the robot, in AI and software and frontier robotics. But it's the manufacturing piece that China, where it has the strength, and the whole ecosystem that they're trying to build around robotics. And that ultimately, when it comes to getting that economic win in robotics, that may be what matters most.
And then as far as the social media aspect of this, there have been so many videos floating around ahead of these games in China of some of these robots. They're on these tracks. They're just absolutely gunning it. They seem to be going very fast, and then they just can't seem to cross the finish line without exploding or crashing or running into something.
Well, the games haven't even officially gotten underway, and there's already one video that is burning up the internet, showing a robot, just as you say, just gunning it down the track, running super fast, a couple of wobbles, and then crashes into this big foam wall, bounces back, splits apart at the waist, and there are sparks flying. And people are, and then there's, the forlorn-looking operator who runs up to it. It's not a perfect science. It was the same thing with the robot marathon. Last year, there were a lot of laughs about how many robots were falling apart or melting down or just, laying down at the finish line or at the starting line rather, and not even moving. Whereas this year, every robot finished, and some of them incredibly fast. So, with this one video setting the tone, I think people have high expectations to get a glimpse of what the future may look like when it comes to Chinese robotics.
The metaphor almost writes itself. Run fast and break things.
Exactly.
Janis, Mackey, Frayer in Beijing. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Brent.
Well, that's going to do it for us at Here's the Scoop from NBC News. I am Brian Chung, filling in for Yasmin Vasugian. We'll be back Monday with whatever the day may bring. And if you like what you heard and what you saw, press the subscribe button.
We thank you for watching, and remember, stay updated on breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or watch live on our YouTube channel.